Aerodynamics is a company remembered as a legendary roller coaster manufacturer that excelled from the 1960s through to the 1990s, but their early days were less about manufacturing roller coasters and more about building small family attractions for local amusement parks. Ed Morgan and Carl Bacon founded Aero Development in 1946. They were based in Mountain View, California, and following a few years of providing merry-go-round attractions to local amusement parks, they were given an opportunity to show what more they could do when Walt Disney contracted the company to provide amusement attractions for his brand new theme park, Disneyland. So Harry, Coasterbot, how did the relationship with Disney grow from there?
That's a great question. Shortly after the opening of Disneyland, Walt Disney had the idea of building a toboggan mountain ride. New Wild Mouse-style roller coasters had also just caught the attention of Disney executives, who later commissioned Aerodynamics to produce a similar style roller coaster inside of an artificial mountain. Then, in 1959, Matterhorn bobsleds opened to guests. The ride became one of the world's first to feature steel tubular track, paving the way for a whole new type of roller coaster. Just short of 2 decades later, Aero would change the game again. They debuted Corkscrew at Knott's Berry Farm, the world's first modern-day inverting roller coaster. The ride featured 2 back-to-back corkscrews, which saw guests go upside down twice. This model was an instant success, with many parks constructing similar attractions, including an amusement park in Ohio, Cedar Point.
Between 1977 and 1982, 27 looping roller coasters were built by Aerodynamics, and with each new project, they were pushing the boundaries with what could be done with tubular steel, including the creation of the launched loop concept. Whilst the launched loop concept wasn't quite as popular as the standard looping roller coaster concept, it was further indication that Aero were willing to push their boundaries with new ideas to complement their existing products. During this time, roller coasters were designed by hand and built by hand, so how far could the development of Aero's looping roller coasters go?
Apparently, quite far. Theme parks wanted the biggest and best roller coasters they could get their hands on. So, Aero's looping concept was pushed to its absolute limits. Knott's Corkscrew originally had 2 inversions, but newer versions of the ride had 3, 4, and then 5 inversions. To enable these roller coasters to feature an ever-increasing number of loops, Aero had to build them taller. As a result, they quickly began producing some of the world's tallest and fastest roller coasters. Vortex at Kings Island opened in 1987 as the world's tallest roller coaster and featured a total of 6 inversions, the most on any roller coaster around the globe too. The desire of theme parks to produce world record-breaking roller coasters eventually led Aerodynamics to produce another first for the industry, the hypercoaster. But Scott, what is a hypercoaster?
A hypercoaster is a roller coaster which has a height between 200 and 299 foot. In 1989, Aerodynamics and Cedar Point introduced a hypercoaster to the world when they opened Magnum XL-200, a roller coaster which took the record as the world's tallest roller coaster with a height of 205 foot. It has been billed as the world's original hypercoaster ever since. The inspiration for Magnum XL-200 was Bandit at Yomiuriland, at the time the world's largest roller coaster which had no inversions. Instead, it was like a large-scale wooden roller coaster featuring large drops, airtime, and a lengthy duration. It was during the construction of Iron Dragon at Cedar Point in 1987, another Aerodynamics roller coaster, that Cedar Point CEO Dick Kinzel asked about the possibility of building the world's tallest roller coaster. Cedar Point and Aerodynamics weren't looking to create a hypercoaster as such, but their desire to build the world's tallest roller coaster led them to building the first hypercoaster. Originally, Aero drafted the plans for a ride measuring 187 foot tall, which would have taken the height record by 17 foot. However, when this was discussed by the board of directors at Cedar Point, it was suggested that they go back to Aero and request the cost for taking the ride past the 200 foot barrier. Following this, the Aero Hypercoaster was born and Magnum XL-200 officially opened on May 6, 1989. For more about the planning, construction and why Magnum XL-200 wasn't exactly as they planned it, check out our other collaboration video linked at the end of this video.
Whoa, that sounds like a good video to me. Anyway, back on schedule. Now, things get a little bit complicated here. In 1991, Aerodynamics went on to build a second roller coaster that broke the 200-foot barrier. Kennywood debuted Steel Phantom, a ride featuring a second drop which measured 225 feet high. However, it was unlike Magnum XL-200. Steel Phantom's lift hill was shorter than 200 feet, measuring 160 foot high, and the ride featured 4 inversions. Initially, it was extremely popular. However, over time, it began to build a reputation for being rough and uncomfortable for guests. This led to its closure at the end of the 2000 season, although all was not lost. D.H. Morgan Manufacturing was brought in to improve the ride by removing the inversions from the layout and replacing them with bank turns and airtime hills. The roller coaster's name was also changed from Steel Phantom to Phantom's Revenge 2. All in all, Aerodynamics originally built a hyper-looping roller coaster, one which could be considered a looper and a hyper at the same time.
Aerodynamics would only go on to build 3 more roller coasters which were classified as hypercoasters. The first of the 3 to open was Titan at Space World in Japan, which debuted on March 5, 1994. Titan broke records in Asia by featuring the tallest drop in Asia at 178 foot and the fastest roller coaster in Asia at 72 miles per hour. Strictly speaking, this isn't a hypercoaster because it falls short of the 200 foot mark. However, for some reason, it is still classified as an Aero hypercoaster. In fairness, it is easy to see why it was classified as one of the Aero hypers. It used the same train type and track profiling as Magnum XL-200, but did fall short of the height statistic to be an actual hypercoaster. Just like Magnum though, the ride was an instant success and drew in massive crowds. Unfortunately, it was closed in 2017 along with Space World, so that's 3 out of 5 hypercoasters and only one of them isn't questionable if it should be classified as an Aero hypercoaster. Harry, please tell me the next one is definitely an Aero hypercoaster.
I can confirm that it is, in every sense of the word, an Aero hypercoaster. In May of 1994, Blackpool Pleasure Beach, located in the UK, opened the big one. Standing 213 feet high, it became the world's tallest roller coaster at the time, making it worthy of the hyper title. In fact, after hearing about Magnum, the director of Blackpool Pleasure Beach, Jeffrey Thompson, went to Cedar Point to ride it. After his experience, he knew that he wanted a similar ride for his park. As a result, he commissioned Aero to design a ride like Magnum XL-200 for the Pleasure Beach, but bigger. He wanted his own version to be taller, faster, and longer than the original, although the big one wouldn't hold on to its records for very long. It was superseded by Fujiyama at Fuji-Q Highland in Japan, but we'll get to that later. Despite being over 25 years old now, the big one still operates today and remains the UK's tallest roller coaster too.
Blackpool Pleasure Beach? I've never heard of that. Anyway, the 5th and final Aero hypercoaster, Desperado, opened in August 1994 at Buffalo Bills Resort and Casino, located in Primm, Nevada. Gary Primm contacted Aerodynamics about building a record-breaking roller coaster for the newly built resort and casino to attract tourists on their way to and from Las Vegas near the California border. Whilst Desperado isn't as tall as the big one, its tallest drop is actually bigger than the big one's tallest drop, which has often caused debate which coaster rightfully held the world's tallest roller coaster title at the time. Desperado is 209 foot tall, with its tallest drop 225 foot, whereas the big one's tallest drop is 205 foot. Desperado's future is currently unknown. In 2020 it was published online that the ride had permanently been closed, so I recently reached out to Buffalo Bills Resort and Casino to seek some clarity on the situation. I wasn't told that the ride is closed permanently, but was told a decision on its future is going to be made in the coming months. It is listed as permanently closed on Google though, so who knows? Unfortunately, the Aero hypercoaster concept never really took off as it was hoped. With the success of roller coasters like Magnum XL-200 and the big one, it is surprising that more of these legendary roller coasters weren't bought by parks around the world looking to break height and speed records. So why wasn't the Aero hypercoaster as popular as the older Aero coaster concepts on the market?
Well, it could be summarised in a single word really: competition. Magnum was new, innovative and loved by many. However, it wasn't the popular style of ride. Theme parks continued to build inverting roller coasters which were seen as more interesting to parkgoers. Between 1989 and 1996, 95 inverting roller coasters opened across the globe, of which Aero made 7. But it got worse. New roller coaster manufacturers began to become popular during the 90s too. Vekoma were dominating the European market, whilst Bolliger and Mabilliard revolutionised the industry themselves. B&M's roller coasters were smoother and arguably more enjoyable than Arrow's now old-school designs. On top of this, in 1992, B&M debuted their own new type of ride, the inverted roller coaster. It took the theme park world by storm. Instead of buying Arrow's new hypercoaster, parks flocked to B&M's new roller coaster. Just 5 years after the construction of the first inverted coaster, Bolliger and Mabilliard had installed 15 of them across the world. Things only got worse for Arrow. Not only did they produce a type of roller coaster parks didn't really want, other companies were now building similar style rides too. In 1996, Fuji-Q Highland debuted Fujiyama, the world's tallest roller coaster, measuring 259 feet high. Built by Japanese company Togo, the ride was similar to Arrow's hypercoaster with a distinct focus on speed, hills and turns. In the same year, D.H. Morgan Manufacturing, a company founded by the son of Arrow founder Ed Morgan, began to construct their own version of the hypercoaster too. Wild Thing opened at Valley Fair, a ride standing 207 feet high. Arrow not only missed out on the fashionable trend, but they had severe competition as well.
From 1997, Arrow Dynamics saw a drastic decrease in projects. Their last few projects included Roadrunner Express, the final Arrow Mine Train, which opened at Six Flags Fiesta, Texas, and Tennessee Tornado at Dollywood in 1999, the final ever Arrow looping roller coaster. The Tennessee Tornado was seemingly a significant upgrade on previous Arrow looping roller coasters, with better, smoother transitions whilst maintaining the old Arrow track style. Instead of looking to upgrade their products, Arrow put faith into innovating new products such as their Wild Mouse model and ultimately the project which would call time on the company, X, at Six Flags Magic Mountain. During the construction of X, Arrow Dynamics declared bankruptcy, and on this occasion the company could not be saved. Instead, their assets would eventually be absorbed by S&S Power, who were one of their main competitors at the time. Arrow Dynamics may have been gone since December 2001, but their status as one of the leading roller coaster manufacturers of the 20th century will not be forgotten. At the time of this video being published, 68 Arrow Dynamics roller coasters remain operational according to RCDB.com. Some of those roller coasters are still firm favourites of roller coaster enthusiasts all over the world. There may have only been 5 Arrow hypercoasters opened, but the hypercoaster concept has continued to live on.
The hypercoaster wasn't a huge success initially, but it did begin to take off. In 1999, more manufacturers of roller coasters began to produce their own versions of the hypercoaster. Intamin debuted Superman Ride of Steel at Six Flags Darien Lake, while B&M opened Apollo's Chariot at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Both rides were able to perform bigger and more complex elements compared to the Arrow hypercoaster, making them more interesting to guests. As a result, both have proved to be more successful too. Since then, B&M and Intamin have produced 15 and 8 of their hypercoaster models respectively. In fact, both companies would also go on to build a classification of ride taller than the hypercoaster, the Giga Coaster, but that's for a different video, I'm sure.
I want to say a massive thank you to Harry for our latest collaboration. It has been really enjoyable to look back on the history of the Arrow hypercoaster, but also to talk about Magnum XL-200 over on the CoasterBot channel.
It's been a blast, Scott. Head over to my channel to learn about the history and inspirations behind the original Arrow hypercoaster, Magnum XL-200. It really is a fascinating roller coaster with a unique story and a unique set of problems.
What's your favourite Arrow Dynamics roller coaster? Be sure to let us know in the comments section below, and before you go, please give this video a like if you've enjoyed it. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon in the next Pleasure Beach Experience video.